This is a show about facing fear, unlocking courage, and taking action.
Courage isn't necessarily a daunting thing.
It's going to give you more purpose. It's going to give you more drive.
It feels like making a courageous decision is going to get you closer to who you aspire to be.
It's knowledge plus faith plus action equals courage.
If you eventually want to be in the front of the train driving it, get on at the back, work your way to the front. Understand the roles and functions, have experience doing them. Most importantly, understand the language so that when you're in the front of the train, you will be in a position to motivate those people that are in those roles and functions.
I think it's always better just to jump in. And what I really love about this one is we're kind of both fluent in brand. And I think having some of those, a lot of my guests aren't fluent in brand. A lot of leadership teams don't I feel like marketing and brand folks are sort of stuck on an island with the rest of these C-suite folks. And so I think I'd love your perspective also. I think we'll talk a little bit about brand. We'll talk about brand love, talk about friend zone for the friend zone. But let's just have a combo and see where it takes us.
I mean, what's interesting is one of the things I love to do outside of work is I love to teach. I'm very involved in Adweek's Executive Mentor Program and the Education Foundation. And so I've had the chance to teach everywhere from Roslyn High School, where my daughter goes here on Long Island, to Harvard. And what's interesting is if you ask a student what the difference between a product and a brand is, you get this look of panic and fear. And while there are volumes of books on the subject, it's really very simple. Brands are nothing more than a group of people with a shared set of values and intent. Simple as that. Product is something that is sold either virtually, it's on a shelf, it's a service, it's a commodity. A brand is values. A brand is emotion, attributes, feelings, and perceptions. And when I read the paragraphs that these students write on the difference, it's a little bit batshit crazy, because the complexity of brand really lies in the simplicity of understanding what it really is at its core and how to protect it. And if you don't understand what it is, how are you ever going to create something like brand love? How are you ever going to create a deep, deep relationship between yourself, your brand, and your customer? You can't.
Well, I'm going to first of all, I love that we're like, hello, deep end. So here we are, which is great. Look, I don't think this is just a student problem. I think this is an industry problem. I think it's a business problem. I go back to the word you used on values. I always say, how valuable are your values? And the amount of companies today that have their values that are not operationalized, like, oh, we have values, they're on the wall in the lobby when we used to go into offices, but they're not truly operationalized. Therefore, it's not showing up in brand. They're not using them as filters for decision making for brands, is one of the massive problems that I see. And I'm trying to shake at the C-suite level. Hey, your values are commodity values. You actually have a commodity value.
Well, if you think about the investments that companies make, the most important investment a company can make is in its human capital. And it hasn't been the case. Coming out of the pandemic, there was this mad dash to kind of figure it out, survival mode. And, the economy for most brands rebounded pretty aggressively, which was a great thing. Okay. The problem was that in any business, it's always about comp year growth. So end of 2020, 21 was lucrative for a lot of people. 22 was a shit show because 21, you couldn't really predict the cycle, right? There was still no travel. It was a lot of spending on me. The discretionary spending was on stuff for the home. It wasn't until the world really opened up, I would say third quarter 21, that you started to see certain things right size. And because brands got super aggressive in moving customers forward, pulling them forward in their life cycle, when it came to annualizing and predicting sales trend, it became impossible. To your point, you can't be a company that has values if you don't instill those values in the humans that populate it. I think for somebody like me, as I look at this book and I look at myself, the most important thing that somebody could take away from this is that there is not a right way or a wrong way. There is just a way. And what I try to do is to provide constructs and frameworks and ways to think about things that can help you as a leader determine your way, not only for how your brand is going to thrive, but how you as a leader are going to build a high performing team and how you're going to behave. And that comes down to this principle that I wouldn't say I coined the phrase, but it's something that's been very much associated with me, and to what degree of success I've had is this notion of thinking human. Do you remember the Jerry Maguire? You remember Jerry Maguire?
Of course.
Yeah. So when Jerry wrote his manifesto, right, his whole manifesto was less clients,
Mhm.
and when I saw that movie, and it was interesting was that I actually did a product placement deal for Reebok as part of Jerry Maguire. It was when I was on the agency side, Reebok was one of the brands. But when I saw the movie, what that moment really resonated with me was the notion of imagine what your brand experience would be like if you treated every customer as if they were your only customer. That is the premise of the notion of thinking human. That also teaches you as a leader how to behave with your team. Imagine if this person on the other end of the Zoom screen or the phone or whatever was the only person that you had on your team to help you. How would you treat them? But at the same time, how do you instill that reciprocal behavior in them? Imagine if I was the only person that could help you. How would you behave with me? How would you treat me? Would you do the right thing when nobody was looking? A lot of that has been lost because they don't teach leadership in graduate school. When I got out of grad school, it was about accomplishment. It was about being the guy, being seen as a rising star. Okay. And if it meant shitting on some people and being a terrible person, I was comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I didn't learn how to be a leader until I was forced to become one. And even then, I had to learn what it was to climb the mountain with a group of people and take a group shot at the top, not a selfie, and how much joy you can have in building a high performing team that when you get to the top of the mountain, the celebration is epic and the journey is even more epic. I call that focusing not on the what, but on the how you
Yeah.
behave as a leader, how you learn, and then most importantly, how you behave as a brand.
I for my book, which I describe as a rite of passage for me, and I'm curious to hear if you feel the same about your process and journey. One of the ahas, and this is not a new idea for the listener here, is I learned it takes you 40 years to figure out who you are, and the next 40 to be that person. And boy, did that get me? Because, by the way, everything I learned from the media or other people that I was watching was, and then you go to Madison Avenue, by the way, and I think we were across the street from each other at some point. I think you were at Saatchi, maybe it was a different time. I was at Messner, which is now Havas now, and so you get into this rat race. I call New York City the treadmill on 10.0. It doesn't slow down for anybody. If you can jump on it and not bust your chin open, you're going to be good for a while. But what I learned there, in my opinion, was some amazing storytellers. So I learned craft, but I also learned like some pretty shitty behaviors by watching people look out and fend for themselves. Now we're gonna go we're gonna go deeper to this. I want to step back for 1 sec because I want to make sure I do you solid. So we're joined by Doug Zarkin, currently CMO of Pearle Vision. You've been there for over a decade. I'm sure you've learned so much there. I love that you said you started as a teacher, and I imagine others see you now as a mentor. I mean, I saw you went to American University. I think you
Yeah.
GW as well. Are you from
The
DC
undergrad
originally?
American. No, no. So I'm originally from, we'll back up. So I originally from Massachusetts, moved to Westchester County, New York when I was really young. Hence, I don't sound like a drunk sword fisherman. Did my undergrad at GW, graduated on a Sunday, and started my MBA program on Monday morning. So I was the guy in the back of the classroom wearing his fraternity letters. And I went on academic fellowship. So I had about a year. I did my MBA in 13 months, which was great. And so DC, I think, is one of the most amazing places to go to school because you are engaged with so many different people of so many different experiences set that going to graduate school actually taught me how to think. None of what I learned in college, none of what I learned in graduate school prepared me for actually getting a job, and what moving through my career trajectory was going to be. But it gave me a really good lesson in, listen, you're going to find yourself in situations where you are arguably the youngest person in the room. And how can you project strength? How can you be comfortable being uncomfortable?
So I am originally from the DMV. I'm
Yeah.
from Potomac, Maryland. I always say how lucky I was to grow up there because back, and I'm doing the whole when I was a kid shit right now,
Yeah.
but like growing up, there was 3 channels. There was Fox was the new thing that was about to show up, and so our local news was international news. So we were instantly that's what was what we were told was important. And to your point, that swirl of understanding what's going on in the world started by me growing up there. I adored my time there. I adore, Doug, that you started an agency, or not started, you were in agency, and then you jumped to the other side of the world. So you sort of, there's empathy in all directions because you've lived both sides.
It's really purposeful. In a world before LinkedIn, you had to figure out your career trajectory through personal relationships and advice. And I got some great advice, which is, if you eventually want to be in the front of the train driving it, get on at the back, work your way to the front, understand the roles and functions, have experience doing them. Most importantly, understand the language so that when you're in the front of the train, you will be in a position to motivate those people that are in those roles and functions. And so I started out at the very end in media, worked my way to account management, started the youth entertainment and lifestyle division of, at the time, the largest private agency in the world, Gray. Did that for a few years, and then, as they said, went to the dark side when I went to Avon. So you're talking to one of the few guys that actually was an Avon lady, and I'm really proud of it. My daughter, my 15-year-old, hates it, but it was such an incredible experience for me.
Well, again, in the spirit of the best part about our job is body jumping, right? It's jumping out of your body and observing a persona and trying to understand what life is like for them. I mean, it is what women want. Just in the spirit of movies that you brought up, McGuire earlier, right? Uh, so what? How did give me the path to Pearle Vision? Like, how did you land there?
So I went from Avon to Victoria's Secret, where I was brought in to take this brand that was in test market, Victoria's Secret Pink, and kind of bring it national and blow it up. When I was at my last spot in fashion retail, which was this company called Kellwood, I got a call from somebody at Luxottica, who I used to work with at Limited, and they mentioned that they were completely renovating their marketing teams across all of the portfolio of brands. And Luxottica owns Sunglass Hut, and LensCrafters, and Target Optical, and Ray-Ban, and Oakley, and a whole bunch of other brands. And so Pearle was, of all of them, the most complex ecosystem because it's a franchise business. And so, me being somebody who loves a challenge, this is what I wanted to do.
Again, what I
Didn't have to
wanted to
move to
do.
Cincinnati. So
Oh,
that was
you did.
bonus. I didn't have to. I didn't have
Oh,
to.
not into chili. That's not your thing.
My kids were really young at the time, and we had just bought a house, and we moved to Long Island, around where my wife's family is, and so I was just getting settled and kind of adjusting to not having Starbucks around the corner. It just seemed too soon to make a move.
Doug, I am hoping for the audience. I want them to understand what your path is, and I appreciate the train metaphor. And at what point in the journey for you, like, did you always know you wanted to write a book, or was it like, is this the right
Oh,
topic?
no. So when I made the decision at the beginning of the summer to step away from Luxottica, um, I had been approached a few times by people that had heard me talk on podcasts or in conference settings, and even some of our franchisees, that some of the expressions and colloquialisms and frameworks that I use to take the complexity of marketing and make it pretty easy for somebody who isn't a marketing person to understand was compelling. And they used to joke, you should write a book. And, as I was kind of figuring out, okay, what do I want to do with myself over the summer as I look for my next opportunity, I came across an email that I had gotten from somebody who could help me write it. And I reached out, and you know what? I realized that it was very cathartic for me to put, a couple decades of thought and constructs and approaches into writing. It's one of the most terrifyingly exciting things I've ever done, because it is truly being judged for who you are at your core, not what you are. Um, and I'm in the home stretch right now. My biggest fear as a multiple assault and battery victim from autocorrect is that the word can will become can't, and is will become isn't. And so I'll have written an entire chapter leading up to this crescendo and the word will be wrong. So I'm stressing about that right now as we get ready to go to print. And hopefully the book will release around October 9th.
It's amazing. Yeah, and again, we're
Thanks.
gonna get into the high level on, okay, you have my attention, right? Like what do you want me to take away from moving your brand out of the friend zone? But before we do that, what have you learned about yourself? Like give me like as you're going through this process, gold medal, silver medal, bronze medal learning on yourself.
So gold medal is I'm absolutely a work in progress, both as a leader, a marketer, a husband, a father, a mentor. When you put your experiences down in writing and you see the path of good, better, best, you realize that best isn't best. Best is just better. I would say that's the gold. Silver is, God, can I not spell? I'm awful. You would think a guy who's got an MBA could put a cohesive sentence together without spelling. I am just god awful. Thank God for Grammarly, and spell check, although it's not always very kind for me. And I would say bronze is, I wish I had this in my journey. I worked for some really terrible people and worked for a few really good ones. And wow, did I learn as much from the bad ones as I did from the good ones.
Yeah, I always say that leaders are not necessarily bosses and bosses are not necessarily leaders. And we
No,
do. We
not at all.
remember the best boss we ever had, and unfortunately we remember the worst boss we ever had. As you think about who the most perfect person or people that you want to pick up this book, if there's an order,
Yeah.
who needs this book the most?
So somebody coming out of undergrad or grad school who's getting into brand management, who's getting into the agency world, an entrepreneur who's trying to figure out how to build an empire. Really helping somebody understand the difference between a product and a brand is a really big deal. You can't possibly effectively lead and unlock the potential of something that you don't know what it is. And, for me, experiences like becoming an Avon lady when I went to Avon taught me the business from the inside out. And maybe a byproduct of the remote generation that we're in, the impatient generation, the data overwhelmed generation that we're in, we forget this notion of thinking human. We forget that our audience is not a data point on an Excel chart, but actually somebody who has feelings and emotions and beliefs, much like your brand does. And it's about finding that interconnection between the two. That's where the magic happens.
See, I worry about in the spirit of word stock market that this generation that's coming up because they're told they have to justify every decision or every dollar, that does the word brand isn't as high. I know how I feel about it. I'm just talking as on the mass level. Do they still really, are they being told that brand matters? And I'll give you an example. And I've had friends here, like Brandless was a great example, right? Brandless basically said, "Hey, let's strip out. You don't have to pay for brand, right? We're gonna strip that out. That's not that important." Brandless made brand, in my opinion, a little bit of a four-letter word, and said just pay for the thing you need that's bringing the utility. And obviously, we know. I'm not saying it's the perfect case study of failure, and who knows what really happened behind the scenes. I wasn't there, and the company's not in business anymore. But what's your take on? Hey, no, brand obviously matters. Like, let's not pass go until we have that conversation. And who needs to hear that?
Brand matters because what brand stands for. And there is a very big difference between having successful products and having a trusted brand. To me, that is something that has to be embodied at the top. Say what you want about Richard Branson. Nothing Richard touches that he puts his name on, that he puts the Virgin name on, is off brand. He's brilliant at it. Jobs, for the bucket of crazy that he was crazy about preserving the integrity of his brand. And every product that carried the Apple name had to represent something. And you have to respect that. I think leaders today have to look at that appreciation for brand and not protect it in the sense of an ethereal position, but from a pragmatic position. Because in today's market, the ramp up from idea to product that is available for sale is quicker than ever. Thank you, Kickstarter. Thank you, Etsy. Thank you, Instagram. Thank you, TikTok. So if you are a brand, iconic brands in particular, you better know how to protect the house because someone's coming.
And the only thing they've got to trust brand is trust, in my opinion, right? So if you're delivering
Well,
on product,
and not to shamelessly plug the book, but I talk about this that, if you look at the customer relationship zones, which is really where the friend zone kind of analogy comes from, it's really on an XY axis, the X being passion, the Y being trust. And the further right you are, the further you go into that golden space of brand love. Brand love is not the end of the journey. It's actually just the beginning of the hardest journey, which is how the hell do you stay there?
hmm,
You know, and the way you stay there is by really adopting what I call a challenger mindset. And a challenger mindset, to use an analogy, and I'm really big on that, because I think it's an easy way to help people understand, is think about like a long distance race at the Olympics, right? The person who's in first is spending the majority of their time looking over their shoulder at who's in second. The person in second place is looking at the person in front of them and thinking about how they're going to close the gap. Nobody's paying attention to the person in third. What the person in third is thinking about is not about the person in first, not about the person in second, but the overall strategy on how they're going to win the damn race. And before you know it, they have figured out their niche, which is not another way of saying small, but their angle, their edginess within a category. To all of a sudden, on that last lap, when the bell is rung, all of a sudden it's a 3-man race. And there are a litany of brands that have been able to do that. And keeping that mentality when you are at the front of the pack, that it is not about who is behind you, but it is about what is in front of you, I think is what makes a great leader.
I mean, I love that you keep bringing up leadership because I feel like there's a deficiency in this topic. And it's funny, I get a chance to go around the country and share what I learned on my listening lap on courage. And I'll always ask people, like, what's your job or what's your role? And somewhere near the end, I'm like, it's interesting that not one person said leader. Like not one person said I'm a leader. And it has to be, you have to be a leader right now. And it's not just about accountability. It's about like staying focused on the task at hand and like taking the brand where it needs to go. In your mind, are
You,
you seeing that too?
you got to take the people. I mean, they're being a leader in today's marketplace with the differences between Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, millennials, Gen Xers. You have to be a 365, 24/7 leader. You are not, you and I are on video, and you're getting a viewpoint into my world, my house, my home. And hopefully my dog won't jump up on my lap like he usually does. But we as leaders now have visibility into the lives of the people that work with us. We never had that before. I had people on my team that were single parents with multiple kids, and you'd hear them screaming in the background, or something would break, and or the doorbell would ring, and you as a leader now have to be leading the entire person, not just the person that's with you from 9 to 5 or 8 to 4. And it requires you to understand and appreciate one very important thing, which is every person has a movie going on in their head. That movie could be a comedy, a tragedy, a love story, an action adventure, all of the above. And you have to factor that in as you are motivating that team to do what you need them to do when you need them to do it. And ironically, that's really what marketing is all about. Marketing is about motivating the consumer to do what you want them to do when you want them to do it. It's that simple.
In the spirit of a tint of irony, the book is called Moving Your Brand Out of the Friend Zone. But as leaders, should leaders be moving themselves into the friend zone with their teams?
Now, um, your job as a leader is not to be their friend. Your job as a leader is to be their leader. if you think about the analogy of a high performing team being a family, right? Families fight, families argue, families always don't get along, but at their heart of hearts, they love each other, and push come to shove, they're there for each other. If you spend your time worrying about whether your team thinks of you as a friend versus your team thinks of you as a leader, you're going to over index too much on things that aren't going to allow your team to actually enjoy the ride. You know, every person I have found wants a degree of authority to make decisions, a degree of autonomy in which to make those decisions. But critically, they have to have the accountability for those decisions. And does a friend hold another friend accountable? Yeah, but it's a little bit different. My team, I don't consider my friends. I consider them my family, because the relationship with them has to go deeper. Much like in the analogy of the friend zone, it's not a surface level relationship. There's passion and there's trust. When I had something personally happen to me that knocked me out of commission for a couple of days, I didn't have to ask my team to pick up the slack. I didn't ask them to send me a gift. I didn't ask them to call my wife and check in on me. They did it. Just like when I had a team member who went through a divorce, she didn't ask me to adjust her in the office schedule. She didn't ask me to call the rest of the team and say, listen, person X is going through a really tough time. Let's all pick up the slack. You did the right thing when nobody was looking. That's not friendship. That's love.
I love that. Yeah, and to me, it's kind of back to I asked you what you learned from the journey on the book. Can you give me what you hope, without giving it away, obviously, but like, what is like one massive aha? I mean, you kind of already given us passion is the X and trust is the Y, and when you add that up, the further to the right you are. Welcome to brand love. But when you think about moving your brand out of the friend zone, what do you hope people take away from it?
Um, I think there's a lot of lessons. I think, we talked about thinking human and kind of that being the X factor. I think ensuring that people understand that consumers make emotional decisions before they make rational choices, on almost everything in their life. But also not being paralyzed by data, because data alone, in quotes, doesn't make decisions for the modern day marketer. The modern day marketer uses data to help inform decisions, because data is really only as good as the questions that you ask. And how do you know what questions to ask? Get your butt out from behind your desk and experience your brand in 3 dimensions. If you are an e-com brand, work in customer service. If you are a brick and mortar brand, get your butt to a location and work in the front line. You can learn so much about what works and what doesn't by just being comfortable being uncomfortable.
Let's say, Doug, for one sec, that you're sitting at a table and all these seats are filled. So you're at the table. There's a chief executive officer, there's a chief financial officer, there's a chief operating officer, there's a chief tech or security officer. You now have a chief information data officer, a chief compliance officer, chief human resource manager, and you as the CMO. So let's say this is really a table that you're out. You would be 12.5% of that table, and you've got, and I'm not trying to say the other side is all living on the other side of the brain, but how do you bring them along? Like, how do you make sure that they understand truly the value of brand and staying human?
So I think as a leader in that scenario, you have to respect the fact that not everybody has the same degree of background that you have. So you have to vacillate your leadership style. Part of what makes marketing is that it is a mixture of art and science. Your CFO may lean heavier into the science part, the performance part, but helping him or her understand that brands that show up on page 1 of Google don't perform well if the brand has no soul. just like you also have to appreciate that doing creative that doesn't drive brand consideration or brand awareness, educated brand awareness, probably isn't worth the money that went into creating it. So you have to approach each situation with humility, but you also have to have the gravitas to be able to lead. Decision by consensus is never going to be a decision. I mean, look at government, for crying out loud, right?
Yeah.
It's about collaboration, not consensus. It's about helping everyone to understand here's the scenario, but inevitably, like I talked about earlier, being comfortable with the accountability for the decisions that you're taking, but doing it in a way that tries to bring people along for the journey. Marketing, in my opinion, that doesn't factor in the operational side is not worth the paper that the words are put on. And I've been very blessed, very, very blessed to have some incredible operations partners to keep me humble, but to also bring the pragmatic perspective about innovation, about execution that sometimes a marketer needs to be hit over the head with when they're in their kind of idea world.
As you go around I mean, you've spoken at some pretty cool places. I know you've spoken at like Duke and
Yep.
Xavier, Miami of Ohio, HBS. When you're sitting with those students who probably are confident, but also have some fear of what comes next, from my perspective, I've always been like, you're not interviewing for a job. You're actually interviewing them to make sure it's a good fit.
Yeah.
Like it's a role reversal, but easier said than done now because I got through that gauntlet of crazy moment in time. What advice do you have for anyone looking to land that first job? Is it just get in and get started, or do you have sort of some wisdom here?
So shameless plug. I talk about this in the book. You know, I have a very, I would say, articulated approach to building a team. I hire for passion. Okay. I can teach you the skill. I can't teach you the will. So as
I
you're
like that.
sitting in, whether it's Harvard Business School or Roslyn High School, recognize that what you learned in school will not equip you to be successful in the job that you're going to have. Okay. It gives you an idea of what it is, but you really can't perfect it until you do it. But what you can communicate is a passion for wanting to learn and willing to listen. You require purpose. So I hire for passion, I require purpose, which means that as somebody joins the team, they have to be choiceful in the decisions they make, the use of their time, the relationships they build. There has to be a plan. This is not, yeah, let's figure it out. Like that's great and wonderful when you're, playing flag football with a couple buddies, but it's not, you have to have a plan of attack. And then I think most critically is celebrate progress. Perfection is almost entirely unattainable. If you have a goal of +5 and you hit a +3, why does the conversation automatically go to the miss? It's got to start with celebrating the win. God, we were 3% better than we were last year. That's pretty epic. Let's understand what we did really well. All right. Now, look, we missed it by 2 percentage points. Let's figure out where the miss came from. But if you don't celebrate the growth, you're never going to get the end result. It's like somebody who's on a weight loss journey or a fitness journey. When I ran my first marathon, I celebrated my 10K. I celebrated my half marathon. I celebrated my 18K. Those were all moments for me. So that when I ended up knocking out, the New York Marathon, it was all right. I was ready. Had I focused on how exhausted I was after my first 10K, and that was all I was focusing on, then I would have never made it. And it's the same thing in business. So what I would say to somebody who's sitting in those classrooms is recognize we're not hiring you for what you know. We're hiring you for the potential of what you can bring to the organization. But realize we are putting a lot more into you than you're giving us back initially. And the payoff is hopefully seeing you grow with the company.
As I look behind you, there's a lot of sports memorabilia. This is a good
Yeah.
reminder that I wish we did more video, but this is
Yeah.
more an audio thing. But you can see, the irony here, and you've kind of nailed it. Like, it's not about perfection.
No.
Right? It's not about perfecting anything. And perfecting is not winning. But as a guy that has a lot of sports memorabilia behind you, winning is important. And I always say courage brands win. And one of my favorite quotes, and I thought about it when you were talking about the 3 marathon runners, right? Is winners focus on winning, losers focus on winners. And they take their eyes off of the prize of winning.
So as the father of a 13-year-old sports obsessed young man who thinks the notion of a participation trophy is ridiculous. My love of sports, not only from a marketing perspective, having done it for a while, is the fact that I am super competitive. I'm super competitive as an individual, I'm super competitive as a leader, and I'm super competitive as part of a team. And sports teaches you incredible life lessons about how to win. You have to know how winning is a skill, and it has almost nothing to do with your individual physical performance, even in an individual physical sport like tennis or boxing. Strategy, technique, conditioning, that's stuff that is all done with other people. So there is no such thing as an individual sport. You know, Coco Gauff didn't just win the Open because of Coco Gauff. She won because she had Brad Gilbert. She won because she had an incredible science team behind her. She won because she had great technology on her feet and on her racket. And yeah, she's no joke. And she put it all together. But, you know, there is no I in team, but there is a me. And the me is, how are you going to take ownership over your competitive journey? Are you going to be a spectator, or are you going to be an active participant? I choose to be an active participant. And I hope somebody who reads the book feels like they're getting a little bit of a game plan that they can go figure out within their roster of players and the playing field in which they're playing how to win.
So moving your brand out of the friend zone, I'd say it's about a week out until launch from when this is going to run.
Yeah.
So if work in progress you, which I think how you described yourself,
Yeah.
could have a conversation with 16-year-old version you
Yep.
off of what you just came out learning from the book writing process, what would you tell yourself? And where are you, by the way? Where are you when you're having this? Where do you want to have this conversation with 16-year-old version?
Well, I mean, you know, maybe stereotypical, but most men do their best thinking in the bathroom. So probably, probably in the men's room. What I would say to my 16-year-old self is, stop worrying about the right way or the wrong way. Realize that it's about you making your way. Stop stressing out about stressing out. Okay. Billie Jean King said it best: pressure is a privilege. I am blessed to have the privileges that come with the pressures, and the pressures that come with the privileges of my life. I'm absolutely blessed for it. Um, and I'm fortunate that I've had people along the way to encourage me. I'm also really fortunate to have people along the way that didn't encourage me. You know, it taught me a lot about resiliency and getting up off the mat. You know, somebody once said to me that every person should get punched in the face once in their life. And you know, one of the sports that I did a little bit of is boxing in my youth, before I realized that, you know, walking around with a black eye is not a great look in the
No, not
advertising
good.
world. Not a good work, not a good look, not a good look. Um, but you've got to be arrogant enough to believe in yourself, but humble enough to realize that the way to be arrogant is to be humble. Knowing what you don't know allows you to maximize what you do know.
You may be jumping the shark on my next question. So I was going to say, okay, what about you today, the 26-year-old version to yourself, and where are you when you're having this conversation?
So the 26 version of myself is, what I'd be saying to myself is, you're going to get there. Okay. The timetable that you have for yourself is probably not realistic. And don't benchmark yourself on the success of others and the trajectory of others. You're on a journey. Things happen for a reason. I'm not a huge believer in fate, but I am a believer in karma. Things do happen for a reason. The adversity that you will face in your life as you come up, the relationships that work and that don't, I think about all the people I dated in my life to eventually meet my wife, and we just celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary.
Awesome.
So you gotta kiss a lot of frogs, before you find your princess. Um, I am truly blessed to have struggled the way I have, and those occasions when I've had a winning season to be part of a winning season. It's made me who I am, for better or worse. And I hope that I can share some of that wisdom with folks who pick up the book and maybe get something out of it.
Okay, so if 75-year-old version of you is talking to you now, what does 75-year-old version say to you if you had to predict?
Jesus, Doug, you could have stretched a little bit more in your youth, because like the back and the legs and the ankles. Um, I think the 75-year-old version would say to me, good work. Good work. You got great kids. Hopefully you have great grandkids. You made a good life for yourself. Um, Maybe you could have enjoyed it a little bit more along the way.
We've got Doug Zarkin here. He's a competitor. He's a good human. He's a father. And now he's an author. He's got a book coming out called "Moving Your Brand Out of the Friend Zone." Check it out, everybody. Doug, thanks so much, man. I'm psyched to like watch your journey. I can see you already.
Thanks, man.
Doing the tour and the lap with students and hopefully companies as well. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Courageous Podcast. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts so more people can find us. See you again next week.